I stood at the back of the church watching my daughter marry her dream man. But when the groom turned and saw me, the color drained from his face. Because 30 years ago, this same man destroyed my life, stole everything I had, and disappeared. Now he was back for my daughter. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Margaret Hayes, and I'm 63 years old. When people in our small Connecticut town see me, they see the woman with the kind smile who volunteers at the library every Tuesday. They see the grandmother who bakes cookies for the neighborhood kids and never misses a chance to help someone in need. They see strength, resilience, and grace. But what they don't see is the weight I've carried for 3 decades, the secret shame I buried so deep that even my own daughter doesn't know the full truth of why we struggled so much when she was young. For the past 30 years, I've been both mother and father to my daughter Emily. I raised her alone in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment that always smelled like whatever cheap candle was on sale that week. I worked 3 jobs simultaneously: morning shift at the diner, afternoon cleaning houses, and overnight data entry from home while Emily slept. I wore shoes with holes in them for 2 years so Emily could have new sneakers for school. I ate plain rice for dinner countless nights so she could have chicken and vegetables. I told her we were playing a game called Budget Challenge, when really we were one emergency away from losing everything. But I never let her see me break. I never let her feel poor even though we were. Every birthday, she got a cake. Every Christmas, she got presents, even if I had to work double shifts for 2 months to afford them. When she got accepted to college, I took out loans I'm still paying off to make sure she could go without drowning in debt. I sacrificed my own dreams, my own comfort, my own future, so she could have hers. And it worked. Emily graduated top of her class and built a tech startup from nothing. At 32 years old, she's successful, confident, and independent. She's everything I hoped she would be. She calls me every single evening at 7 o'clock, no matter where she is or how busy she gets. She sends me flowers on Mother's Day and random Tuesdays just because. She tells me I'm her hero, the strongest woman she knows, the reason she never gives up on her dreams. What Emily doesn't know is why I had to be that strong. She was only 2 years old when it happened. Too young to remember the before times when we had a beautiful house, savings, and security. Too young to remember the man who smiled at her, called her princess, and promised to take care of us forever. Too young to remember the day he vanished with everything we had, leaving behind only debt, shame, and a mother who had to rebuild from absolute zero. I never told her the full story. I told her that some bad investments went wrong, that sometimes adults make mistakes with money, that we had to start over. I never told her about the man who manipulated me, who studied my vulnerabilities after my husband died, who made me believe in fairy tales again just long enough to rob me blind. I never told her his name or showed her his picture. That was my biggest mistake, because if I had, she would have recognized him when he walked into her life 6 months ago, calling himself by a different name and playing the same game all over again. My life had finally found its rhythm after so many years of chaos and struggle. Every morning at 6, I woke to the sound of birds outside my bedroom window in the small Cape Cod-style house I'd managed to buy 5 years ago. It wasn't much, just a modest 2-bedroom with blue shutters and a front porch that creaked when you walked across it. But it was mine. Fully paid off with my own money, every penny earned through honest work. No one could take it from me. I'd developed routines that brought me comfort and peace. My garden was my sanctuary. Every morning after coffee, I'd spend an hour among my tomato plants and rose bushes, pulling weeds and talking to the flowers like they were old friends. The physical work calmed my mind and reminded me that beautiful things could grow if you were patient and consistent. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, would wave from her kitchen window, and we'd exchange pleasantries about the weather or whose roses were blooming better this year. Tuesdays were library days. I'd been volunteering at the Riverside Public Library for 8 years. helping elderly patrons navigate the computer system, and running the weekly book club for seniors. The head librarian, Patricia, had become one of my closest friends. We'd have lunch together at the small cafe across the street, sharing sandwiches and stories about our lives. She knew about my struggles raising Emily alone, though not the complete truth about why I was alone. Patricia always said I had the most honest eyes she'd ever seen, that I was someone people could trust. The irony wasn't lost on me. Thursdays meant book club meetings at my house. 6 women all around my age, gathering in my living room with tea and cookies to discuss whatever novel we'd chosen that month. We'd known each other for years, and our discussions always wandered from the books to our lives, our grown children, our aches and pains, our small victories. These women had watched me transform from a struggling single mother, barely holding it together, to someone who'd finally found solid ground. They celebrated with me when Emily's business took off, when I paid off my mortgage, when I could finally afford to go on a weekend trip without anxiety. But the highlight of every day was 7 o'clock. That's when Emily called. No matter where she was, Boston, New York, or traveling for business conferences, she carved out that time for me. We'd talk for at least 30 minutes, sometimes an hour. She'd tell me about her company's latest developments, the challenges she was facing, the team members who frustrated or impressed her. I'd tell her about my garden, my book club, the funny thing that happened at the library. These calls were my anchor, proof that all those years of sacrifice had been worth it. My daughter had grown into an extraordinary woman who still wanted her mother in her life. On weekends, I'd meal prep for the week, do my laundry, and watch old movies on the classic film channel. Sometimes I'd visit the farmer's market downtown or meet Patricia for brunch. My life was simple, predictable, and safe. After 30 years of looking over my shoulder, of panic attacks at unexpected knocks on the door, of nightmares about losing everything again, I'd finally learned to breathe. I thought the worst was behind me. I thought I'd survived the hardest chapter of my life and earned my peaceful ending. I had no idea that the nightmare I'd been running from had been circling back, getting closer, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. And this time, it wasn't coming for me. It was coming for the one person I loved more than life itself. It started with a phone call that should have made me happy. It was a Wednesday evening, and Emily's face filled my phone screen during our usual 7 o'clock call. But something was different. She was glowing in a way I hadn't seen since she landed her first major investor. Her eyes sparkled, and she kept touching her hair, a nervous habit from childhood that only appeared when she was excited about something. "Mom, I need to tell you something," she said, biting her lower lip to suppress a smile. "I've been seeing someone. It's still new, but Mom, he's incredible. He's kind, successful, and he actually listens when I talk about work instead of his eyes glazing over like the last guy." My heart swelled with happiness for her. Emily had always been so focused on her career that her personal life took a back seat. She'd had a few relationships over the years, but nothing serious, nothing that made her face light up like this. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Tell me about him." She talked for 20 minutes straight about this man named David Mitchell, how they'd met at a business conference in Boston 3 months ago, how he was an independent investor who understood her world, how he brought her favorite coffee to her office without being asked, how he made her laugh. I listened, smiled, and felt genuine joy for my daughter. She deserved love. She deserved happiness. "I want you to meet him," Emily said. "Can we come for Sunday dinner this week?" That Sunday, I cleaned my house twice and made pot roast, Emily's childhood favorite. I set the table with the nice dishes I rarely used and put fresh flowers in the center. At exactly 5 o'clock, I heard Emily's car pull into the driveway. I wiped my hands on my apron, checked my reflection in the hallway mirror one last time, and opened the front door with a warm smile. Emily bounded up the steps and hugged me tight. "Mom, this is David." And then I saw him. He was tall, well-dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and dark jeans. His hair was professionally styled with distinguished gray at the temples. He wore expensive-looking glasses and had the kind of smile that belonged in a toothpaste commercial. Everything about him screamed success and sophistication. "Mrs. Hayes, it's such an honor to finally meet you," he said, extending his hand. "Emily talks about you constantly." The moment his hand touched mine, something cold slithered down my spine. It wasn't logical. It wasn't anything I could name or explain. But every instinct in my body screamed, wrong, wrong, wrong. His handshake was firm and confident, but there was something in his eyes, something that lasted less than a second before his perfect smile covered it. Was it recognition? Calculation? Fear? I forced myself to smile back. "It's lovely to meet you too, David. Please come in." Throughout dinner, I watched him. He said all the right things, complimented the food, asked thoughtful questions about my garden, and treated Emily with obvious affection. He was charming, attentive, and appropriate. But I couldn't shake the feeling crawling under my skin. The way he held his fork, the cadence of his laugh, the way his eyes followed me when he thought I wasn't looking. At one point, he excused himself to use the bathroom, and Emily leaned across the table, beaming. "Mom, isn't he perfect? I really think he might be the one." I looked at my daughter's hopeful face and felt my stomach twist into knots. "He seems very nice, honey," I managed to say. That night, after they left, I sat alone in my kitchen and stared at my hands. They were trembling. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was just an overprotective mother, suspicious of any man who came near her daughter. But deep down, in a place I couldn't ignore, alarm bells were ringing so loud I couldn't sleep. Something about David Mitchell was terribly, terribly wrong. I spent the next few weeks trying to convince myself I was losing my mind. Every time that cold feeling crept up my spine when I thought about David, I pushed it down and reminded myself that I was being irrational. This wasn't about him. This was about me and my unresolved trauma from 3 decades ago. I was projecting my past fears onto an innocent man who had done nothing wrong except fall in love with my daughter. Emily called every evening as usual, and now every conversation included David. How he surprised her with flowers at work. How he remembered her favorite restaurant. How he held her hand during a scary movie. She was falling in love deeply and completely, and I could hear the happiness in her voice. What kind of mother would I be to poison that with my paranoid suspicions based on nothing but a feeling? "You're overthinking this," I told myself, while pruning roses in my garden. "He's just a normal man. Emily is a smart, successful woman. She wouldn't fall for someone dangerous." But at night, lying in bed, my mind replayed that first handshake over and over. The flicker in his eyes. The way his smile didn't quite reach those eyes. The familiar way he held his wine glass at dinner. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. with my heart pounding, unable to name what was wrong, but feeling it in every cell of my body. Patricia noticed something was off during our Tuesday lunch at the cafe. "You've been quiet lately, Margaret. Is everything okay?" I stirred my soup absently. "Emily's dating someone serious. I met him a few weeks ago." "That's wonderful. You don't seem happy about it, though." I hesitated, then forced a laugh. "I guess I'm just being an overprotective mother. You know how it is. No one is ever good enough for your child." Patricia smiled knowingly. "What's he like?" "Perfect," I said, and the word tasted bitter in my mouth. Too perfect, maybe. Successful, charming, says all the right things. I should be thrilled, but something about him makes me uncomfortable. "Did he do something inappropriate?" "No, nothing like that. He's been completely respectful. It's just a feeling." I shook my head. "I'm being ridiculous. I need to let it go." Patricia squeezed my hand across the table. "Margaret, you've got good instincts. If something feels wrong—" "It's not wrong," I interrupted, more sharply than I intended. "I'm just not used to seeing Emily with someone, that's all. I need to adjust." Over the next month, I saw David 3 more times. Each visit, I studied him like a textbook, searching for concrete reasons to justify my unease. But he was consistent, kind to Emily, polite to me, successful in his career. He talked about his family in Ohio, his college years at Northwestern, his investment philosophy. Everything checked out, everything made sense. My book club ladies met at my house on a Thursday, and Joan brought up Emily's relationship. "I heard your daughter is dating someone serious. When do we get to meet him?" "He's wonderful," I said automatically. "Very successful, treats her like a queen." "But," Susan prompted, reading something in my expression. "But nothing," I said firmly. "I'm just adjusting to the idea of sharing her with someone else. You know how mothers are." They laughed and agreed, sharing stories about their own children's relationships and the adjustments they'd had to make. I laughed along with them, stuffing down the screaming voice in my head that kept saying, "Run, protect her, something is wrong." I told myself that voice was the echo of old trauma. I told myself I was being unfair to David and unfair to Emily. I told myself that after 30 years of hypervigilance, I'd forgotten how to recognize when something was actually safe. I told myself so many lies that I almost believed them. Almost. But late at night, when I couldn't sleep, I'd pull out my old photo albums and stare at pictures of Emily as a little girl, and that cold feeling would wrap around my heart like ice. Something was wrong. I knew it. But I didn't want to be right. Retry eyes. 6 months into their relationship, Emily called with news that made her voice shake with excitement. "Mom, we're engaged. David proposed last night at the restaurant where we had our first date. We're having a small engagement party this Saturday at his place. You have to come." I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced enthusiasm into my voice. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Congratulations." The engagement party was held at David's upscale apartment in downtown Boston. Sleek, modern furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows, and expensive art on the walls. About 30 people mingled with champagne glasses, congratulating the happy couple. I stood near the kitchen, watching Emily glow as she showed off her ring to guests. David had his arm around her waist, playing the perfect fiancé, and my stomach churned. I was refilling my water glass when I noticed David talking to an older gentleman near the bookshelf. They were discussing something serious, investments maybe, and David's confident smile had tightened slightly. Then I saw it, a small gesture, barely noticeable. David reached up and touched his left eyebrow twice with his index finger, a quick nervous movement before resuming the conversation. The water glass nearly slipped from my hand. That gesture. I knew that gesture. But from where? The rest of the party passed in a blur. I smiled, made small talk, hugged Emily, and left as soon as it was polite to do so. But that gesture haunted me during the entire drive home. Touched the left eyebrow twice. I'd seen someone do that before. But who? When? That night, I couldn't sleep. At 2 in the morning, I found myself climbing the creaky ladder to my attic, pulling the chain on the bare bulb and searching through boxes I hadn't touched in decades. Old tax returns, Emily's baby clothes, my late husband's belongings. And then, in the far corner under a dusty sheet, I found it. A cardboard box with 1994-1995 written on the side in faded marker. My hands trembled as I carried it down to the kitchen table. I knew what was inside. I'd packed it away 30 years ago and promised myself I'd never look at it again. But now, with my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, I opened the box. Newspaper clippings, police reports with "case closed, suspect not found," stamped in red. Bank statements showing my zeroed accounts. And there, at the bottom, a photograph. It was the only picture I had of him. We'd only been together for 6 months before he vanished, and he'd always been camera shy, always finding excuses to avoid photos. But I'd caught him once, candid, at a coffee shop where we'd met for breakfast. The man in the photo was younger, maybe 35. His hair was dark brown and thicker. No glasses. His face was leaner, more angular. He wore a cheap suit and a charming smile. But the eyes. Those eyes were calculating even in a casual photograph. I stared at that photo for a long time. Then I pulled out my phone and opened Emily's Instagram. I scrolled to the engagement photos she'd posted. I zoomed in on David's face. Different hair, now gray, expensive glasses, a more filled-out face, probably from better living, 30 years older. But the bone structure was the same, the slight asymmetry of his smile, where the left side lifted just a fraction higher than the right. The distinctive shape of his ears, slightly pointed at the top, the spacing of his eyes, the shape of his jawline under the added weight. And then I found a video Emily had posted, David talking at a dinner party. I watched it 3 times, and there it was. Someone asked him a challenging question about market volatility, and before he answered, he reached up and touched his left eyebrow twice. The same gesture, the same man. I sat at my kitchen table as dawn broke through my windows, the old photograph in one hand and my phone in the other, and the truth crashed over me like a tidal wave. David Mitchell was Richard Vance. The man who destroyed my life 30 years ago had found my daughter. I didn't sleep for 3 days. I couldn't eat. I sat at my kitchen table with that old photograph in my laptop, searching for answers. I typed Richard Vance into every search engine and database I could find. Nothing came up except old newspaper articles about the investigation that went nowhere. He'd vanished completely, like smoke. But I knew he was out there. And now I knew where. On Monday morning, I called a private investigator whose number I found online. His name was Marcus Webb, a former police detective who specialized in fraud cases. I drove 2 hours to his office in Hartford and laid everything on his desk. The old photograph, the police reports, David's information, the engagement announcement. "I need you to tell me if I'm crazy," I said, my voice shaking, "or if this man is who I think he is." Marcus studied both photographs for a long time, then looked at me with serious eyes. "Give me 2 weeks." Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I continued my routine, volunteering at the library, tending my garden, talking to Emily every evening. But inside, I was screaming. Every time Emily mentioned wedding plans, every time she talked about how lucky she was to find David, I wanted to tell her everything. But I needed proof. I needed to be absolutely certain. Marcus called me on a Thursday afternoon. "Mrs. Hayes, can you come to my office? I have information you need to see." I broke 3 speed limits getting there. Marcus had a thick folder waiting on his desk, and his expression told me everything before he said a word. "Sit down," he said gently. The folder contained a nightmare. Marcus had done what the police couldn't do 30 years ago. He'd traced Richard Vance through a trail of identities, alias state after state. After leaving Connecticut in 1995, Richard became Michael Barrett in Florida, where he romanced and defrauded a widow out of her insurance settlement. Then James Patterson in Ohio, conning a businesswoman out of her investment portfolio. Then Daniel Cross in Texas, Stephen Wright in California, Christopher Lane in Nevada, 6 different women, 6 different identities, 6 devastated lives, and millions of dollars stolen over 3 decades. "He's gotten better at it," Marcus said quietly. "More sophisticated. He targets successful professional women now, not just vulnerable widows. And he's had cosmetic work done. Nose job, chin implant, probably Botox. Enough to change his appearance, but not so much that he looks fake." My hands shook as I turned the pages. Photos of Richard through the years, gradually transforming into the man I knew as David. But the worst was yet to come. "Mrs. Hayes, this wasn't a coincidence," Marcus said, sliding another document across the desk. "Richard knew exactly who Emily was before he approached her. Look at this." It was a detailed research file, Emily's business profile, her net worth, her company's recent investor funding, articles about her success, photos of her from business conferences, and notes, handwritten notes about her schedule, her habits, her background, and one line that made my blood run cold. Mother. Margaret Hayes, limited contact, lives in CT, low social media presence. He researched her for months, Marcus continued. He knew she was your daughter. He knew you lived far away and rarely posted online. He gambled that you wouldn't recognize him after 30 years and cosmetic surgery. Their chance meeting at that business conference? He bought a ticket specifically to be there. He manufactured every moment of their relationship. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred with tears. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was personal. He'd deliberately chosen Emily, knowing she was my daughter, knowing exactly how to destroy me all over again. There's more, Marcus said, his voice grave. One of his previous victims, Sarah Chen in California, died 6 months after marrying him. Hiking accident. She left everything to him in her will. Police investigated but found nothing concrete. I looked up at him with horror. You think he killed her? I think your daughter might be in danger, Marcus said, and I think we need to act fast. Marcus pulled out another folder, this one even thicker than the first. I kept digging because something didn't add up. Why would a con artist who's been successfully stealing and disappearing for 30 years suddenly want to get married and stay in one place? That's when I found the real plan. He spread documents across the desk like a prosecutor presenting evidence. My stomach turned as I began to understand the scope of what Richard had orchestrated. 3 weeks ago, Emily signed over 30% of her company's shares to David as an early wedding gift, Marcus explained, pointing to a legal document. He convinced her it was romantic, a show of trust and partnership that's worth approximately $4 million. I felt the room spin. Emily had mentioned something about surprising David with a gift, but I hadn't realized the magnitude. It gets worse, Marcus continued. 2 months ago, she updated her life insurance policy. The beneficiary is David. The policy is worth $3 million. Last month, she gave him power of attorney for medical decisions and added him to her bank accounts. He has legal access to everything. But they're not even married yet, I whispered. Exactly. He's been systematically positioning himself to control every aspect of her life and assets. And here's the terrifying part. Marcus slid over another file. Sarah Chen in California. I spoke with the detective who handled her death. She fell from a cliff during a hiking trip with her husband, Richard, who was using the name Stephen Wright at the time. He showed me the police report. Sarah Chen, age 34, successful pharmaceutical executive. Married Stephen Wright after a whirlwind 6-month romance. 3 weeks after the wedding, she signed over stock options worth $5 million. 5 weeks after the wedding, she updated her life insurance policy, naming him as sole beneficiary. 6 weeks after the wedding, she was dead. The detective said Stephen was devastated, played the grieving widow perfectly. But there were inconsistencies in his story about what happened on that trail. A witness saw them arguing near the cliff edge, but without concrete evidence, they couldn't charge him. He collected the insurance money and disappeared 2 months later. My entire body went cold. He's going to kill her. I can't say that with certainty, Marcus said carefully, but the pattern is undeniable. Every legal and financial piece is in place. After the wedding, he'll have complete access to everything. And based on the timeline with Sarah Chen, we'd be looking at 6 to 8 weeks after the ceremony before something happens. I grabbed the edge of the desk to steady myself. We have to tell Emily right now. We have to stop this wedding. Marcus shook his head grimly. I've been doing this for 20 years, Mrs. Hayes. If you tell her now, she won't believe you. She's in love. She'll think you're jealous or controlling or having a breakdown. She'll show him the evidence, warn him, and he'll disappear. Then he'll come back under another name in 5 years and target her again, and we'll have no way to track him. So what do? I asked, tears streaming down my face. Just watch him marry my daughter and wait for him to kill her? No, Marcus said firmly. We build an airtight case and we expose him publicly in a way he can't escape. but it has to be done carefully. We need the FBI involved. We need to coordinate with law enforcement in multiple states. We need to catch him in a position where he can't run and Emily can't protect him. He pulled out a calendar. The wedding is in 3 weeks. That's how long we have to put together a case strong enough to destroy him and save your daughter's life. Are you ready to do whatever it takes? I looked at the photographs spread across his desk. 6 women's lives destroyed, 1 possibly murdered. And now my Emily, my baby girl, standing at the edge of the same cliff. I wiped my tears and met Marcus's eyes with steel in my voice. Tell me what to do. I made it halfway home before I had to pull over. My hands were shaking so violently I couldn't hold the steering wheel steady. I pulled into an empty rest stop parking lot, turned off the engine, and that's when the dam broke. 30 years of buried trauma came crashing down on me all at once. I sobbed so hard I couldn't breathe, clutching the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me from drowning. The memories I'd worked so hard to suppress came flooding back with devastating clarity. I was 32 again, sitting in my small kitchen in 1995, staring at empty bank statements. Emily was 2 years old, playing with blocks in the living room, completely unaware that our entire world had just collapsed. Richard had been gone for 3 days, and I'd finally worked up the courage to check our joint account. 0. My savings account. 0. The investment account he'd convinced me to open with my inheritance from my late husband. Gone. Everything was gone. I remembered calling his phone over and over, getting a disconnected number message, going to his apartment and finding it completely empty, like he'd never existed, filing a police report and seeing the pity in the officer's eyes as he explained that con artists like Richard rarely get caught, that they're professionals at disappearing. I remembered the shame, the crushing, suffocating shame of having to tell my family what happened. My sister's disappointed face. My father saying, "Margaret, how could you be so stupid?" I remembered having to sell my house, the one my late husband and I had bought together, the one where we'd brought Emily home from the hospital. I remembered packing our belongings into a tiny apartment that had mold in the bathroom and thin walls where we could hear the neighbors fighting. I remembered Emily at age 5 asking why her friend Jessica had a big house and lots of toys when we didn't. Remembered lying to her, saying we were saving money for something special, when really I was working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. Remembered her wearing the same winter coat for 3 years because I couldn't afford a new one. Remembered her 10th birthday, when I could only afford a small cake from the grocery store, and she hugged me and said it was the best cake ever, not knowing I'd cried myself to sleep the night before because I couldn't give her more. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every meal I skipped so she could eat, every dream I buried so hers could flourish, all of it had been because of Richard Vance. He had stolen more than money from me. He'd stolen years of my life, years of Emily's childhood, the security and stability she deserved. And now he was back. Not for me this time, but for her, for my daughter, the one pure and beautiful thing I'd managed to protect and nurture despite everything he'd taken from us. He was going to steal her future, her company, her money, and if Marcus was right, he might steal her life. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My face was red and blotchy from crying, mascara streaked down my cheeks. I looked old and broken and powerless, 63 years old, and I still felt like that terrified 32-year-old woman who'd been too naive and trusting to see a predator until it was too late. Not again, I whispered to my reflection. Not my baby, not Emily. Something shifted inside me. The tears stopped. My hands steadied. I wiped my face with a tissue and stared at myself with new determination. I couldn't protect myself 30 years ago because I didn't know what I was dealing with. I was naive, grieving, and vulnerable. But I wasn't that woman anymore. 30 years of struggle had forged me into something harder, stronger, and smarter. Richard Vance had made one critical mistake. He'd come back for my daughter. and a mother protecting her child is the most dangerous force in the world. I started the car and drove home with purpose. I had 3 weeks to save Emily's life, and I would not fail her. The next morning, I woke up at 5 o'clock with absolute clarity. No more crying. No more fear. I had 3 weeks to dismantle Richard Vance's entire operation, and I wasn't going to waste a single minute on emotions that wouldn't help me win. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and created a detailed spreadsheet. Everything Marcus had given me, I organized into categories: financial documents, identity records, victim testimonies, timeline of crimes, evidence of premeditation. I studied it like I was preparing for the most important exam of my life. Because in a way, I was. Pass meant Emily lived. Fail meant I'd lose her forever. At 8 o'clock, I called Marcus. "I'm ready. What's the first step?" "We need to build a case strong enough to involve federal authorities," he said. "Wire fraud across state lines makes this FBI jurisdiction. But we need more than circumstantial evidence. We need DNA, financial records, and victim cooperation." "Then let's get it." Over the next week, I transformed into someone I didn't recognize. I withdrew $20,000 from my retirement savings, everything I'd managed to save over the past decade. Marcus tried to protest, but I cut him off. My daughter's life is worth more than my retirement. Get me what I need. Marcus used the funds to hire additional investigators in 3 states. They tracked down Richard's previous victims, and I personally called each woman who was willing to talk. These conversations broke my heart. Linda in Florida, who lost her late husband's life insurance settlement. Patricia in Ohio, who lost her family's business. Jennifer in Nevada, who lost her children's college fund. Each story was a mirror of my own pain, and each woman carried the same shame and anger I'd lived with for 30 years. "He needs to be stopped," Linda told me, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll testify. I'll do whatever it takes." 3 women agreed to provide statements. 3 women brave enough to relive their trauma if it meant protecting other women from the same fate. I coordinated with Marcus to have their testimonies officially recorded and notarized. Then came the hardest decision. Emily called me during our regular 7 o'clock time, talking excitedly about wedding dress shopping and honeymoon plans. Every word was a knife in my chest because I knew the truth and couldn't tell her. Not yet. "Mom, I want you to help me choose the dress this weekend. Can you come to Boston?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her everything right then. But Marcus's words echoed in my mind. "If you tell her now, she won't believe you. She'll warn him, and he'll disappear." So I swallowed my panic and said, "Of course, sweetheart. I'd love to." That weekend, I sat in a bridal boutique watching my daughter try on wedding dresses, knowing she was planning to marry a monster. When she stepped out in a beautiful lace gown, beaming with joy, I had to excuse myself to the bathroom, where I splashed cold water on my face and gripped the sink until my knuckles turned white. "You can do this," I whispered to my reflection. "Stay strong for 3 more weeks. Then you end him." I returned to the showroom with a smile plastered on my face and told Emily she looked like a princess, because that's what mothers do. We smile through our own pain to protect our children's happiness, even when that happiness is built on lies. That night, I met with Marcus and handed him a small plastic bag containing a champagne glass. I'd managed to take it from David's apartment during a recent dinner, wrapped carefully in a napkin. His fingerprints and DNA were all over it. "Get this tested against the evidence from 1994, I said. "I kept the hairbrush he left in my apartment. The police still have it in evidence storage." Marcus looked at me with respect. "You're thinking like a detective now." "No," I said coldly. "I'm thinking like a mother who will do anything to save her child." The DNA results came back on a Tuesday. Marcus called me at 6 in the morning, and I knew from his voice that we had him. It's a match. The DNA from the champagne glass matches the hair samples from 1994. David Mitchell is definitively Richard Vance. This is enough for an arrest warrant. I closed my eyes and felt something close to relief wash over me. What's next? I've been in contact with Special Agent Rebecca Torres at the FBI's White Collar Crime Division. She's reviewed everything we've compiled. She wants to meet with you today. By noon, I was sitting in a federal building in Hartford, across from Agent Torres, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who reminded me of a hawk watching prey. She laid out my evidence across the conference table and studied it with intense focus. "This is exceptional investigative work, Mrs. Hayes," she said. "We have wire fraud, identity theft, and enough pattern evidence to suggest possible homicide. We can arrest him now." "No," I said firmly. "If you arrest him before the wedding, Emily will spend the rest of her life believing I destroyed her happiness. She'll think I fabricated evidence because I didn't like him. She needs to see who he really is. She needs to understand what he was planning to do to her." Agent Torres studied me carefully. "You want to expose him at the wedding. I want him to feel safe. I want him to think he's won. And then I want him to see everything collapse in front of witnesses, in front of Emily, in a way that leaves no room for doubt." A slight smile crossed the agent's face. "You want justice and you want your daughter to understand the truth. I can work with that. But we do this my way, with proper legal protocols." Over the next 2 weeks, we orchestrated every detail. Agent Torres assigned 2 undercover FBI agents to attend the wedding, posing as distant relatives of the groom. Marcus would be there as my guest. We obtained legal permission to place recording devices in the church, carefully positioned in public areas where audio surveillance was permitted. I contacted Detective Howard Chen, the retired officer who'd handled my case in 1995. He was 70 now, living in Florida, but when I explained the situation, he booked a flight immediately. "I never forgot your case, Margaret," he said over the phone. "It haunted me that we couldn't catch him. I'll be there." The hardest part was the letter. I spent 3 nights writing and rewriting a letter to Emily explaining everything. The full truth about Richard, about our past, about how he deliberately targeted her, about Sarah Chen's death, about the financial trap he'd set. I included copies of key documents, photographs, and victim testimonies. The letter was sealed in an envelope marked "To Emily if something goes wrong." I gave it to Marcus with strict instructions. "If anything happens to me before the wedding, if Richard suspects something and I disappear or have an accident, you give this to Emily and the FBI immediately." Marcus took the envelope solemnly. "Nothing's going to happen to you. We've got this covered." 5 days before the wedding, I received the call I'd been dreading. It was Emily, and her voice was strained. "Mom, I need to tell you something. David and I talked, and we decided to keep the wedding really small, just immediate family. I'm so sorry, but we're not able to invite extended family or friends. It's going to be very intimate." My blood ran cold. He'd convinced her to exclude me without explicitly saying it. He knew I was a threat, even if he didn't know how much. "I understand, sweetheart," I said calmly. "It's your day, whatever makes you happy." After we hung up, I called Agent Torres. "He's trying to keep me away from the wedding." "Doesn't matter," she said. "Churches are public spaces during ceremonies. You have every legal right to be there, and when you walk through those doors, we'll be right behind you." I looked at the calendar. 3 days left. I was ready. The morning of the wedding, I woke at dawn after barely sleeping. My hands were steady as I dressed in a simple navy blue dress and put on minimal makeup. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a woman who'd spent 3 weeks preparing for war. Today, I would either save my daughter or lose her forever. I arrived at the small chapel in downtown Boston 2 hours early. It was a beautiful old stone church with stained glass windows and wooden pews that creaked with history. Agent Torres was already there, dressed as a wedding guest, checking the audio equipment hidden in flower arrangements and discreetly placed near the altar. "Everything's set," she whispered as I approached. 2 agents are positioned outside. Detective Chen is sitting 3 rows back. Marcus will enter with you. Once you give the signal, we move." My phone buzzed. It was Emily. "Getting ready. Wish you could be here, Mom. I love you." My heart shattered. She had no idea I was about to destroy what she thought was the happiest day of her life, but I was doing it to save her life. I typed back, "I love you more than anything in this world. Always remember that." Guests began arriving at noon. I watched from my car across the street, slipping on dark sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat. David's supposed relatives, all actors playing their parts. Emily's colleagues from work, genuinely happy for her. A few of my daughter's childhood friends who still kept in touch. At 12:30, Marcus slid into the passenger seat of my car. "You ready for this?" "I've been ready for 30 years. We waited until the ceremony was about to begin, then entered through the side door of the church. I kept my head down, hat obscuring my face, and slipped into the back pew. From this vantage point, I could see everything. The small gathering of about 40 people, the flowers decorating the altar, the nervous energy of a wedding about to start. And then I saw her. Emily walked down the aisle in her lace wedding dress, radiant and beautiful, and my breath caught in my throat. She looked so much like she did as a little girl playing dress-up in my old scarves and costume jewelry, pretending to be a bride. Except this wasn't pretend. This was real, and it was a nightmare. David stood at the altar in an expensive charcoal suit, looking every inch the successful, sophisticated groom. His smile was confident. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd successfully isolated Emily from me, that the overprotective mother had accepted defeat and stayed home. The officiant began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." My heart pounded so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Agent Torres sat 4 rows ahead, her hand resting casually near her purse, where her badge and gun were concealed. Detective Chen was positioned on the right side, his old eyes sharp and focused on David. Marcus sat beside me, solid and reassuring. "Do you, David Mitchell, take Emily to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," David said smoothly, and I saw Emily's eyes fill with happy tears. "Do you, Emily Hayes, take David to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Emily whispered. The officiant smiled. "If anyone here has any objection to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace." The church fell silent. This was the moment, now or never. Save her or lose her. I stood up. The movement was simple, quiet, but every head in the church turned toward the back pew. Emily's face registered confusion first, then shock as she recognized me despite the hat and glasses. And David's face went from confident to confused to horrified in the span of 2 seconds. The color drained from his skin. His mouth opened slightly. His hand gripped the altar so tightly, I could see his knuckles turn white even from the back of the church. He knew. He recognized me. And in that moment, he knew exactly why I was there. "This wedding cannot continue," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent church, "because the groom is not who he says he is." The church erupted in confused whispers. Emily's face transformed from shock to fury. She stepped toward me, her voice shaking. "Mom, what are you doing? You can't just—" "Your fiancé's real name is Richard Vance," I said loudly, clearly so everyone could hear. 30 years ago, he conned me out of my entire life savings and disappeared. Since then, he's defrauded at least 6 other women under different identities. One of those women is dead. David's expression shifted rapidly. The shock gave way to a practiced smile, the concerned fiancé dealing with a delusional mother-in-law. "Emily, I don't know what's happening, but your mother is clearly unwell. Maybe we should—" "Don't," I cut him off, walking down the aisle. "Don't you dare try to manipulate her right now. I have proof." I held up a folder, and David's eyes locked onto it with unmistakable fear. "DNA evidence, Richard. The champagne glass from your apartment matches hair samples from 1994. Your fingerprints match. Your face matches, even after the plastic surgery." "This is insane," David said, but his voice cracked slightly. He reached up and touched his left eyebrow twice, that nervous gesture I'd seen before. "Emily, your mother has obviously had some kind of breakdown." Special Agent Rebecca Torres, FBI. Agent Torres stood from her pew, holding up her badge. Richard Vance, we have evidence of wire fraud, identity theft, and you're a person of interest in a homicide investigation. The church went dead silent. Emily's face drained of all color. What? No, this is a mistake. His name is David Mitchell. He's an investor from Ohio. There is no David Mitchell. Detective Chen stood up from his pew, holding an old police file. I'm retired Detective Howard Chen. I investigated Richard Vance in 1995 when he defrauded your mother. He's been using different names across the country for 3 decades. 2 more FBI agents appeared at the church doors, blocking the exits. David's eyes darted between them, calculating. His charming mask was cracking, and something cold and dangerous was emerging underneath. Emily, he said, his voice changing, becoming harder. Did you transfer those company shares like we discussed? The question was so callous, so nakedly mercenary that several guests gasped. Emily stared at him like she was seeing a stranger. What? The shares, he repeated, irritation bleeding through. Did you transfer them or not? You son of a bitch, I said, stepping closer. She was never a person to you, was she? Just another mark, just another account to drain. David's face twisted into something ugly. You should have stayed away, Margaret. You had 30 years to forget about me. This didn't have to involve you. You targeted my daughter. My voice echoed through the church. You researched her for months. You knew exactly who she was, who I was. You planned this entire relationship. Prove it, David sneered, and there it was, the real Richard Vance, arrogant and vicious. Marcus stepped forward and handed Agent Torres another document. These are notes found in Richard's apartment in Nevada, 2019, research files on Emily Hayes, her net worth, her company, her family structure. He's been tracking her for 6 years, waiting for the right moment to approach. Emily made a sound like she'd been punched. 6 years? You've been watching me for 6 years? David's expression went cold. You were supposed to be easy, successful but lonely, rich but naive. Your mother was supposed to be a non-factor, some poor nobody living hours away. He looked at me with pure hatred. But you couldn't just let me have this, could you? Have this? I stepped between him and Emily. She's not a thing to have. She's my daughter. David suddenly lunged toward the side door, but Agent Torres was faster. Richard Vance, you're under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and as a person of interest in the death of Sarah Chen. As agents moved to handcuff him, David struggled, his composure completely shattered. She means nothing. None of them meant anything. It's just money. It's just... Sarah Chen's family deserves justice, Agent Torres said coldly, snapping the handcuffs on. And now they might finally get it. Emily collapsed into a pew, her wedding dress pooling around her, her entire world crumbling. I rushed to her side and wrapped my arms around her trembling shoulders. She didn't pull away. The church emptied quickly as agents led Richard away in handcuffs. His shouting echoed through the stone halls until the doors closed behind him. Emily's friends stood frozen, unsure whether to approach or give us space. I held my daughter while she sobbed into my shoulder, her white dress now wrinkled and stained with tears. I'm so sorry, I whispered, stroking her hair like I did when she was small. I'm so sorry you had to find out this way, but I had to protect you. She pulled back and looked at me with red, swollen eyes. You knew? How long did you know? 6 weeks, since the engagement party. I recognized him, but I needed proof. If I'd told you without evidence, he would have convinced you I was lying, and he would have disappeared. Emily's face crumpled again. I almost married him. I signed over company shares. I gave him access to my accounts. Oh God, Mom, what did I do? Agent Torres approached us gently. Ms. Hayes, the good news is we've frozen all financial transactions associated with Richard Vance's accounts. We should be able to recover your company shares. As for the other access points, we'll work with your lawyers and bank to secure everything. Over the next several weeks, the investigation expanded. Richard was formally charged with 15 counts of wire fraud across 7 states, 6 counts of identity theft, and the FBI reopened Sarah Chen's death as a homicide investigation. 3 of Richard's previous victims, including myself, provided testimony. The DNA evidence was irrefutable. The paper trail was damning. Emily threw herself into damage control for her company, working with lawyers to untangle Richard's access to her business. At night, she stayed at my house, unable to face her empty apartment where he'd spent so many evenings. We talked for hours, and slowly, she began to understand the full picture. "I feel so stupid," she said one night over tea in my kitchen. "How did I not see it?" "Because he's had 30 years to perfect his technique," I said gently. "He's a professional manipulator. This wasn't your fault, Emily. It was never your fault." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "All those years growing up when we had nothing, that was because of him?" "Yes, but we survived. We survived, and we built a good life anyway. And now, we stopped him from doing to you what he did to me." The trial took 8 months. I attended every day, sitting in the courtroom with Linda, Patricia, Jennifer, and the other women whose lives Richard had destroyed. Sarah Chen's sister testified about her sister's death, and the prosecution presented evidence suggesting Richard had researched the hiking trail weeks before the accident, including specific dangerous points where someone could fall. In the end, Richard Vance was convicted on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for the first 15 years. He was 68 years old. He would likely die in prison. When the verdict was read, I felt something I hadn't felt in 30 years. Peace. Not happiness, not celebration, but a quiet, profound peace. The nightmare was finally over. Emily sold her company's shares and started a new venture, this time with me as a full partner. Hayes and Hayes Consulting, the sign read. We worked together, mother and daughter, building something real on a foundation of trust that had been tested and proven unbreakable. A year after the trial, Emily and I stood in my garden planting new rose bushes. She was dating again, cautiously, but with better instincts now. She'd learned to spot the red flags, to trust her gut, to value substance over charm. "Thank you, Mom," she said suddenly, her hands covered in soil. "Thank you for saving my life." I hugged her tightly, this beautiful, strong daughter I'd raised alone. "You would have done the same for me," I said. "That's what family means. We protect each other, no matter what." 3 years have passed since that day in the church. I'm 66 now, and my life looks completely different than I ever imagined it would. Emily and I run our consulting business from a shared office space in Connecticut, halfway between both our homes. We have lunch together 3 times a week, and yes, she still calls me at 7 o'clock every evening, though now we're usually wrapping up work conversations rather than catching up across distance. This morning, I'm in my garden again, the place where I've always found clarity. The roses are in full bloom, red and pink and white, their fragrance filling the air. Emily is getting married next month, for real this time, to a kind man named Thomas, who she's been dating for 2 years. He's a teacher, humble and genuine, and the first time he came to Sunday dinner, he brought flowers for me and helped wash the dishes without being asked. Most importantly, when I looked into his eyes, I felt nothing but warmth. No alarm bells, no warning signs, just a good man who truly loves my daughter. I think about the woman I was 30 years ago, naive and trusting, destroyed by a predator who saw my vulnerability as opportunity. I think about the woman I became, hardened by struggle, working 3 jobs just to survive. And I think about who I am now, standing in this garden with soil under my fingernails and peace in my heart. The truth is, what Richard Vance did to me was terrible. He stole my money, my security, and years of my life. But he couldn't steal what mattered most. He couldn't steal my love for Emily or my ability to protect her when it counted. In trying to destroy both of us, he ultimately destroyed only himself. I learned something profound through this experience. Trauma doesn't just wound us, it teaches us. Those 30 years of struggle gave me the pattern recognition to spot a predator when he came back wearing a different face. My pain became my power. My past became the weapon I used to protect my daughter's future. Trust should never be given blindly, especially to people who seem too perfect, too charming, too good to be true. Because sometimes they are exactly that, too good to be true. Real love doesn't rush. Real love doesn't isolate you from family. Real love doesn't require you to sign over your assets as proof of commitment. A mother's instinct is rarely wrong. It's not paranoia or jealousy or control. It's the accumulation of every lesson learned, every scar earned, every pattern recognized. When something feels wrong, it usually is. And the greatest act of love is sometimes destroying someone's beautiful illusion before that illusion destroys them. Emily's wedding next month will be everything her first wedding wasn't. Genuine, joyful, and safe. I'll walk her down the aisle with my head held high, knowing I fought for her and won. Knowing that the little girl I raised alone became a strong woman who survived betrayal and came out stronger. Knowing that we protected each other when it mattered most. Richard Vance thought he could come back and finish what he started, but he underestimated the strength of a mother's love and the power of a woman who refused to be a victim twice. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have confronted him immediately or waited to build an ironclad case? Have you ever had an instinct about someone that turned out to be right, even when everyone else thought you were wrong? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else recognize the warning signs. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more powerful true stories of survival and justice. Your support helps us bring these important stories to light. Remember, trust your instincts, listen to that inner voice, and never apologize for protecting the people you love. Thank you for watching, and stay safe out there.